Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our transit series where we go over the astrological transits that we've been through and offer advice to you, the listener. And I'm so excited for this one today. We're talking about Pluto's very long journey in the seventh house of commitments, partnerships, legal battles. It can be a bit of a doozy. This is maybe a more personal transit. Anytime Pluto is kind of transiting the angles, it's affecting the entire chart. So here to talk about this and so much more is my friend Vivian of Stars in Alignment, and of course Anthony Parada, who has been here a million times. Anthony, welcome back. Vivian, welcome again.
Thank you.
Nice to be here.
So I think it'll be best if we start with some real basic stuff, and then we'll dive into the deeper stuff. So let's start Pluto. Pluto is transformations. It is cycles of death and rebirth, the phoenix within all of us. Also power struggles, other people's resources, the attachments that we get from other things that are outside of ourselves. That's very Pluto. Am I missing anything here? Does anyone want to add some more Pluto catchphrases, or what does Pluto mean to you guys personally?
I think Pluto transits, separate from, Pluto significations alone, usually represents an ego death or a death of identity. I also see the Pluto as the movement of large amounts of resources or inheritances. The idea of the things that we would prefer to keep hidden. And did we discuss trauma, the experience of trauma? Because I think I definitely think Pluto represents hidden traumas.
For sure. You don't want to deal with the shadow world.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, well, yeah, I was going to say, I also think Pluto deals a lot with power and our relationship with power, whether that's inner power, external power, power struggles. I also think it can be empowerment too, from a natal perspective. But I think that also goes hand in hand with working with your shadow as well. Obsession, I've noticed a lot, depending on how the Pluto native works. And then, I'm going to throw a little style in there. I think I've talked about this with you before, B. Pluto tends to speak to mass investments from a style perspective. So when I wrote my book, a lot of the research I did around Pluto was actually in leg shapes and how generations between, like, if your generation sex, yes. So I'll just talk about this real quick because I want to throw this in there. But the generation that sextiles certain generations, they tend to push along certain trends. So like Pluto in Aquarius sextiles Pluto in Libra, both are like wide leg, flare, low rise, right? That's the trend. Pluto in Scorpio, Pluto in Capricorn, that's the skinny jean, tight jean, which also goes to Pluto in Virgo, which is when the slim leg pant kind of really became in vogue during that time. So to speak to Viv's point about it being mass resources, it can also be where we invest our time and energy, just to kind of like round that out.
Love that. Oh my goodness. Anthony is going to be back for our Astro Style this summer, and I'm super excited to deeper into that in Astro School, because I'm already watching the replay of the lecture that you gave already, and I'm just taking notes like a mad woman. It's excellent. Anthony is a wealth of knowledge when it comes to style and astrology. So yeah, Pluto in the seventh house. So we're dealing with not only themes of power struggle and attachments and obsession and trauma in one-on-one relationships, but it's actually, because it's in a square, a challenge to the midheaven and the IC, which are these, the IC is the insular part of us. The midheaven is what other people see. We're going through external changes as well as a result of who we're coming up against, right? So whether that is a positive thing, like meeting a therapist who transforms the way you look at the world, that can be a very Pluto through the seventh house theme, or whether that is meeting somebody, maybe you're starting a secret relationship or a relationship where there's a there's a power inequality happening there. All of these themes are very resonant of pulling up from, Pluto likes to pull things up from the underworld, but especially when it's like squaring the IC. It's like, it feels very much like a crossroads kind of energy where you can't go home again kind of thing.
I did want to throw in that, my perspective of the houses is slightly different. And the seventh house, in addition to being an angle, was known as the setting place. And it's also one of the places that was where we would look for death. So I think a lot of it ties into the times before love for marriage was a thing, and it was a business agreement, and it was kind of the death of the maiden's life. I think that had a lot to do with it, but I also think it represents what we did when the sun would set. Because for a long time, I mean, we had no lights, right? So when the sun would set, that's where we would experience darkness and death. It was where we experienced sex and one-on-one relationships. It represented things that had a very intimate nature. And I know we're going to get back to this, but as soon as Pluto entered the seventh, I have Pluto on the IC. So it was my Pluto square at the same time.
So if you have a client come see that Pluto is about to transit their seventh house, what are some like bullet point thoughts that come to mind? What are some circumstances that you would tell a client to look out for, along with like maybe some tangible advice from your experiences? Whoever wants to go first.
I'll let you go first then.
I mean, usually I will start by asking a lot of questions about, have they been in a long partnership? What is it that are they interested in partnership? For some people, I've had clients that have zero interest in partnership. And they come to me at a point where they say, I've never had a committed relationship in my life. And this has happened more than once. And they're like, I don't know what it is that I want. And inevitably, if Pluto is about to transit the seventh, that is going to become evident. If they are someone that's been partnered, I ask them if their perception of what they desire most in partnership is undergoing a kind of awakening or change.
I think to kind of piggyback off of that, I want to say, to me, the seventh house also holds all one-on-one dynamics. So this is going to be platonic, all forms of relationships, including client work. So if you are someone who works with clients too, or practitioners, seventh house can kind of bring that in. So whether it's romantic or not, I do think your role in your relationships is going to have like some form of an evolution. I think commitment overall as a concept also gets some form of transformation. And I also view, and not everyone shares this, but maybe you all do, I view the ascendant as how you see yourself, not how other people see you. I think oftentimes people take you in initially from the descendant because it's the first interaction they have in a one-on-one dynamic. So then when Pluto is on the descendant, I think your view of how you're received also changes and is transformed. Maybe you begin to see your descendant more, embody it, change it. I don't know, something around like ego death, I think plays into that too.
That makes so much sense. And I deal with a lot of people that are very deep therapeutic work. And actually, a bunch of my closest friends are therapists, and a handful of them have a lot in the seventh. And I do like the idea of how you're received by other people, which is funny because I actually got married when Pluto crossed my descendant.
Interesting. And I met my now husband maybe a few years in, but I had had a series of really hard relationships and moments. And actually, I came into my queerness, like owned it when Pluto crossed my descendant and started. I had never dated anyone before, and I immediately just started dating men. So, like, that was kind of my initial experience.
Yes,
So it's
and
interesting that you got
obviously,
married.
yeah, being received completely differently. And you know,
Right.
there are only a handful of things that like scream death to me in a chart, you know? And you like you think Pluto crossing the descendant, you're like, oh, that's the end. And it's not necessarily the end as much as it's the end of something and the beginning of something else.
Mhm. I agree. The thing I've been trying to communicate a lot to my clients, especially during the Pluto Aries Libra eclipses, is that commitment equals flexibility. So you commit to the evolution of something, and I think Pluto on the descendant is the embodiment of that value or the embodiment of that idea. The only way that you can succeed collectively in the relationship of whatever kind of relationship it is if you're committing to what it's becoming, not to what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. So what do you think are some of the challenges of this transit? What are some of the, pieces of inner work you guys have maybe had to do or shadow work that you've had to work on through this transit?
Oof.
So much. So from my perspective, Pluto not only opposed my rising, it opposed my Mars, squared my moon, squared my Jupiter, and squared my Venus when it was in my seventh house. Um, so all at various times too. So I didn't really get a break until like the later years of Pluto in Capricorn. Um, I think the initial opposition, and B, I think you and I talked about this in the Mars Pluto opposition. I think the initial opposition for me to my rising in Mars related to my relationship with my eating disorder and my body dysphoria, and how that was used as a form of personal control to things that I had no control over. And I think when we think about Pluto in terms of control, Pluto Mars in particular, that bombastic relationship of what can I do when I have no control, plus the square to my moon that was happening simultaneously. What's the safety, right? And during those years, I moved a lot. I formed some, talk about secret relationships. My first relationship ever with a man was completely secret. And not even for me, but for them. Like they hid it from everybody.
That's wild.
Um, yeah. And the, yeah, I think the challenges come from control issues, power struggles, um, and then and like kind of how you deal with that, at least for me, from my experiences, and how you move through change and not resist it.
Yeah, I think it's really good to enter any sort of Pluto transit with the acknowledgement that something in my life is going to change insurmountably, right? Like by the end of it. I mean, it's a long transit. However, I think resisting the forces of change is only going to bring it more intensely, and the destruction can be kind of ruthless if you are resisting it. So to implement maybe relationships in your life that help you transform would be one piece of advice, like finding a really good therapist, finding a really good friend that like you can purge safely with, that isn't going to like hold what you say against you, that feels good within your body. Something you said, Anthony, is very interesting. I've had a number of clients who are Cancer risings, and when Pluto was going through their seventh house, they were dealing with a lot of body dysmorphia,
Mhm.
food types of issues. And that makes perfect sense because think about it. Cancer is ruled by the moon. That's our nutrition, how we're comforting ourselves. Capricorn in the seventh, that's restriction or having like a
Mhm.
things. So of course those issues would come up. That makes perfect sense. Also the moving. But I'm
Mhm.
curious, you see a Leo, I mean, most likely if you're watching this, you're going to be a Leo rising unless you're
Mhm.
20 years into the future and we'll re-record then. But like if you see a Leo rising coming in and there's an Aquarian story kind of coming in with Pluto moving into Aquarius, what are some thoughts that maybe you have on things that could come up specifically for Leo risings?
So, Viv, unless you want to say, I have something that comes up to mind,
Oh,
unless you want to
please
say
go
something.
ahead.
Okay.
Yes.
Um, the So I want to touch on quickly with the Cancer Capricorn eating thing. I also think it's dealing with the perception piece too. Again, seventh house is how people take you in, so it's how we think we're being perceived by others. Now, for Leo Aquarius, the first thing that comes to mind is breaking rules to make your own rules. And I think understanding that your relationship inadvertently, if your descendant is Aquarius, your relationships are always going to be unconventional. But there's a power struggle that happens societally, Aquarius, and personally, Leo, right? So if we have Pluto moving through the seventh house in Aquarius, you're going to be pushed up against what you believe or what you were taught was true about relationships, and then what your actual reality is going to be. So I think by breaking rules to make your own, so long as they're not harmful, that they're ethical and they're moral, then I always have to put those disclaimers, then I think that is where some of the deeper transformations are going to happen. Again, I think the power struggle comes from how do you move through those relationships? And then even practicing, Viv, you mentioned with Mars and Aquarius, um, a certain level of detachment that sometimes has to happen. And I think maybe one of the things you're also going to be put up against is if you are someone who's a Leo rising and you see yourself as someone who gives a lot, is very generous, well, then on the descendant Aquarius, is there an aloofness, a detachment, or something that you might bring in a one-on-one dynamic that also needs to be examined, or the people you attract that also exhibit those behaviors too?
Yeah, I had a client recently who is a Leo rising, and they're married to a Leo rising. So they're both going through it together. And something that has been coming up recently is they've been realizing a lot of the ways in which they were raised to believe they should show up in relationships, or the ways that relationships were modeled for them might not necessarily be the way.
Are they
And
are they the
not
same? I'm so sorry. Are they the same age? Do they have the same Saturn, or do they have
Yes,
different? Okay.
yes, they're only born like a few days apart, so it's very interesting to observe, because there's a definite lesson coming in. And one of the things that really came out that was really difficult for one of the partners was they show up as a certain type of person, but through this relationship, they've found out that maybe they're not that type of person. Maybe they're, maybe there were some discussion, as Anthony said earlier, about like the ethical constraints of relationships. They've always considered themselves a pretty ethical person. They care about this, that, and the other. But their partner is like, well, if you care about this thing, then like, why don't you care about this thing? And so they're finding a lot of holes in foundations in a way.
I think to go back a step when we were talking about what the experience of Pluto through the seventh was. I think we discussed, both of us, what happened when Pluto crossed the descendant. But I think as a whole, what's really interesting, I got married during this point. Pluto crossed my North Node, which is in the seventh. And
Mm-hmm.
I actually figured out through this whole process that traditional structured relationships and marriage was not what I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the obsessive part of it was as soon as Pluto moved into the seventh. And it's interesting because I don't use the outer planets as rulers, but when I was making
Mm-hmm.
notes for
Me
this
either.
talk, I was like, it's wild to me how much each of these major transits actually affected my fifth, which is Scorpio.
Mm.
And, it's worth, I think, taking a second look. I think, the outer planets move too slowly to really look at, but my son was also born when Pluto retrograded over my
Mm.
ascendant. And he's got Saturn in Scorpio, so which is
Mm.
bizarre. He was born when Saturn was transiting my fifth, which is connected to this transit. But
Mm-hmm.
the whole thing basically was that the minute Pluto entered my seventh, I went from being someone who had never wanted children, who I think hungered for deep partnership with the North Node in the seventh, but I decided I wanted marriage. I decided I wanted children. And that was the bulk of what occurred during Pluto's transit through my seventh. And now I'm on the other side of it. I don't think I'll ever get married again. Um, and have come to it through the erosion of an ideal as Pluto transited my seventh. So it was like complete beginning and end.
Well, and I think this is really interesting because B, you mentioned like, oh, this was Cancer, Capricorn. Again, though, this is a luminary ruled and a Saturn ruled, right? So I think everything that Viv has just brought up can be something that is experienced for a Leo rising and an Aquarius descendant because they're going to be put up against what they like. Yes, the tradition versus the reality. Like, I mean, similarly, you know, you're saying that, I'm thinking to myself, well, yeah, you know, growing up, I never thought I could have that traditional looking whatever, because I knew I was gay, but I didn't communicate that. And then, you know, actually during this transit, we'll see if it goes away, but in 2015,
It was the
gay
exact
marriage
opposite.
was legalized. Yes. So I actually had an inverse effect. So I actually spent a year, well, maybe even over a year, completely single, like self-imposed isolation.
Yeah.
I moved up the coast, like many, many, many miles away, barely knew anybody, isolated myself for a year, focused on what I wanted, focused a lot on my physical wellness and my mental wellness and my spiritual wellness. And then I met my now partner. We've been together, it was 10 years in April. I'm actually looking at that date and I'm like, oh, that's so funny because it was Pluto opposite Jupiter in my first and seventh, right during that time. Saturn moving through my fifth. But the other things that sort of have happened is I was granted, quote unquote, the right to marry from whatever, from the powers that be, right? I got engaged during this time. I did get married during this time. I bought a house during this time. And what's interesting is actually my husband and I might be selling our house now that the transit's over.
What was that
So,
again? You might be selling it?
And it's going to quickly dip back right into our seventh house very briefly for like, I think it's 6 weeks or 8 weeks just this fall, and then it goes
Not
away.
looking forward to those 6 to 8 weeks, I'm telling you.
Honestly, I'm over it. I'm just like, we're going to be fine. I mean, we've endured, what was it, 15 years? I think I can do 6 weeks.
Anthony, I have to ask you, if someone is selling a property in this transit, because that could be something that comes up. You were talking about this the other day. Can you share with us some rituals that like help move the property or sell the property?
Yes. So did I tell you the St. Joseph thing? Is that why you're saying that? Oh, that's so funny.
I'm selling the property right now, so I'm listening.
So for the
property. So there you go.
So for those that don't know, I think actually this is good because Pluto can also be ancestral connections. So I think there's a connection here. Just want to throw that out there. Your relationship with the dead, by the way, seventh house Pluto transit, you should have a relationship with the dead. So I built a really strong relationship with my ancestors during this time. I'm of Catholic and Italian descent. And one of the things that is practiced often in Italian culture and Italian folk magic is in order to sell a home, you purchase St. Joseph, you bless it, you bury it upside down in the yard, facing your house, with him facing your house. You recite a prayer and you leave it there until the house is sold. Once the house is sold, you then have to unbury St. Joseph and take him with you. Because if you don't, then it's just going to be a transient house that continually gets sold. So you want to Yes. So the key piece is once you bury him and the house is sold and everything signed, sealed, delivered, you take him with you.
I love that.
My father died during this Pluto transit. It's really interesting. Mars crossed natal Pluto, and it wasn't during the square, but natal Pluto is in the fourth, and so Mars was in Libra when he passed away, but definitely during Pluto transiting the seventh, which again,
Did you feel, because like I said, like building a relationship with your ancestors can feel very Pluto in the seventh. Do you feel like that's something that sort of sparked? I don't know if you have a relationship with your ancestors, but if
I
that's something that sparked that for you.
actually, I do. I have a very deep and long maternal
Me
relationship
too.
with the dad. I have the master of my nativity in the eighth. So I think, I
Mm,
don't know how many years ago it was, but I knew that it was important for me to communicate with the dead. And my mother's
mm,
family, the lineal line, speaking of Pluto, always communicated in dreams post
mm.
when after they died. And I have Pluto trine the moon in my natal chart.
Um, you know, because I also think about being mentioned like the angles being impacted. So we have father mother archetypes being impacted through the midheaven IC or
That's right.
10th house, fourth house. So then that Pluto squaring and kind of unearthing and building those relationships. And yeah, I think it all kind of goes together.
You know, Greek people are very spooky, much like Italian people.
Hmm. Mm. You're Greek? Is that what you said? Oh, oh
Love
my
it.
God, we're like this.
We're neighbors, as my family used to say.
Oh,
That's where the property is that I'm selling. It's in Greece. So unfortunately,
Oh,
I can't bury anything because I'm not there, but I might ask my cousin to do something for me.
you should. It doesn't have to be big. He can be this big.
Oh,
if
nice.
we
That's my Saint Joseph. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I could definitely send her something that big.
if we wanted
Hmm.
to work specifically with Hades or Pluto in a spiritual sense throughout this transit, what are some things that could be very helpful, either like spell work or prayers or rituals that you think are helpful? For me, the first thing that obviously comes up is shadow work, obviously, with any Pluto transit. Um, when I'm working with Pluto, I like to always joke that I am pretending that Pantera is coming over, basically. You want Crown Royal, you want some like good whiskey or rum, you want like some delicious, rich chocolate cake. Pluto likes the things that are rich and that will get him fucked up, I feel like. So those are really great offerings that I used to put out when I was going through my Pluto transit. I put those out on my altar. Another thing that I did was I wrote a letter to Pluto and I said, I know you're trying to restructure this part of my life. This is what I would like to see changed. This is how I would like to use my power. Can you please help and guide me towards either people or circumstances that further this goal? And I found that to be quite helpful. I was actually hospitalized during a Pluto transit, and I didn't want to be in the hospital. The hospital was totally traumatizing and yuck. But it was funny. They were giving out these chocolate chip cookies at the hospital, and I put them out as like an offering. And I wrote a letter to Pluto, and I was like, "Get me the fuck out of here!" And I had at that point hadn't been seeing a doctor. They kept giving me the runaround about that. And literally within an hour of doing this spell, they were like, "We're sending you home tomorrow." And it was like,
Hmm.
"Thanks, Pluto."
I too have written notes, and I think I have a few altars in my house, and I like the interplay of shadow and light, but I have dirt that I got from the from St. Louis #1 in New Orleans. So I always think any representation of graves or dead or the dead. I have my mother's tape measure. She was a seamstress. And I know that it seems
Hmm.
like an odd thing to put on a Pluto altar, but I always like to connect Pluto to the dead or to the underworld.
No, I love that. I mean, I have literally an ancestral, so I have multiple altars too. Specifically, I have an ancestral altar I'm staring at. I have a family tree book. I have red ribbon that I have found, like from ancestral things. I have relics, keys, whatever I can find. I do burn rituals, like burning rituals a lot around Pluto. So similar to Mars, but what I do instead with where Mars, you might keep the ash or turn it into something. I return the ash into the earth for Pluto. And then I use it as like kind of tilling and
Yeah.
growing. Uh, and the dirt is interesting because if you do any sort of ancestral veneration and you're close with the ancestors, if you can physically go visit them and you've built a relationship, I think then you're safe to take dirt from the cemetery. It's all about the relationship, though, for me personally. So it took me probably a year and a half before I felt like it was comfortable enough to take dirt from the grave or from the cemetery for my ancestors.
I actually am going to be doing a workshop specifically on that. And it's called
Oh.
Magic, and it's going to be coming in June. So you're watching this later, that's also available for you. And I actually talk about the rituals of going to, if you want to go to a cemetery and get dirt, what is appropriate and what you should do. Quickly, I can talk a little bit about that. So one of the things you'll notice anytime you go to a cemetery, there's going to be these big gates around them, and usually they're made of iron. Iron, of course, is an energy belonging to Mars. Mars is about severing swords and, having your guard up, right? And so it is a protective agent in a spiritual sense. So something that you can do that's really simple, if you want to get some cemetery dirt and you want to get it yourself, you don't want to purchase it you can purchase it from an occult store, but if you'd rather get it yourself, I recommend bringing a plastic bag, and in the plastic bag you're going to put some coins, maybe some pennies, some nickels, quarters, whatever. And when you enter, you're going to introduce yourself, welcome yourself, hello, this is here. I am asking the spirits for help. I'd like to take this dirt for this particular reason. And just kind of announcing yourself, introducing yourself, making friends with the spirit first. If you should take some dirt, you will want to take the coins that you brought, and you will leave that in the place of the dirt. And that is a nice little offering that you can do, and also very protective. I would recommend entering with some sort of protection on you, whether it's a amulet or a talisman that's protective. If you're working with crystals, I would say something like black obsidian or smoky quartz is really good, because that's going to be very protective of you. And then I would take it a step further and maybe even do a spiritual bath when you get home. I really like the unfolding bath or the banishing bath from Art of the Root, but you can make your own at home too.
I wanted to say that aside from my childhood magical spells, right? Because I'm sure all of us did our own little version of magic when we were younger. New Orleans was where my magical practices were born. Mm-hmm. I lived there pre-Katrina, and I don't ever take dirt from a grave site where I do not know the owner. However, all of my relatives are buried in Greece, so getting graveyard dirt from Greece is difficult. Burial is a very, very weird thing in Greece. Athens proper is so densely populated that they actually don't have a lot of cemetery room, and the earth is very much like you would see in like Arizona or California. It's extremely rocky. But I do always ask for permission, and I do always I always say my thank yous. I don't know why it never occurred to me to leave coins, and that's really lovely. So
yeah, it's a simple thing you can do. Also, I was going to just quickly say, you mentioned that you have sewing shears on your altar that were ancestral. I have grape shears, my friend.
I love them. They're beautiful.
I love that there was a time in which someone would purchase grape shears, like that grapes were given with such craft that you needed shears for them, their own particular scissors. So I love these scissors, Grandma.
Did you have, you haven't had it through your 7th, right, B?
No, I'm in the 6th right now. I'm a Virgo rising, and I've had it through my 5th and my 4th, but not quite my 7th. I'll eventually get there. I'll catch up to you guys.
And Anthony, you said it opposed your Mars, correct? I'm interested in that for a later discussion, as Pluto will join my Mars in Aquarius.
In Mars.
But the one thing that I didn't mention is, like, did we talk about Pluto being purgative?
The higher octave.
Oh no, that too. But I was thinking a lot with Venus squaring Pluto today, very appropriate for our talk. I was thinking a lot about purgation, or like
Mm,
this idea of expelling things or releasing them,
mm.
sometimes often a violent way. And when with Pluto Mars during that transit through the seventh, did you notice that people or even like you were even having like a physical purgative process?
So it was interesting because during the height of the Mars opposite Pluto, I was living on a Mars line, a Mars ascendant line. And it was very violent, like physically and emotionally to me. I was living in Knoxville, Tennessee. So being an openly gay person in a very southern area, I had a lot of violence towards me. So yes, and a lot of my relationships were severed very violently or very harshly as well. However, there was also this amazing regenerative quality, which I think also speaks to Mars Pluto too, that had occurred. And some of those relationships that were severed have come back around now, like literally in the last few years, with a lot more clarity to context as well. Some in which the people have completely transformed, transitioned, or shifted in their own perspective, even in their own bodies. So, and I've been able to reapproach them differently as well. So that's interesting that you bring that up.
Yeah. Are we allowed to talk about sex, B?
You can talk about whatever the hell you want. First, you can, I do not censor people.
I mean, because I like it's been recent that I've been thinking about Pluto's connection to sex, right? And we haven't talked about
Mhm,
that, but like, Pluto governs all of like the purgative processes and like coming and
mhm,
shitting and like all of the really like intense visceral things that happen. And it was also during Pluto transiting the seventh that I actually I left. I was a professional dominatrix for many years.
mhm,
It was when I left that profession. So there was,
mhm.
and I think my relationship to sex and relationships underwent a process that had to do with me leaving that type of work behind.
Hmm. What's interesting about that is the dynamic, and I could be wrong because I have not personally experienced that, but is the dynamic between like power, control, submission, like all of that, all the Pluto things,
Yeah.
and and it being a very underworld, taboo, very Pluto sort of experience, and then you entering a Pluto in the seventh, and that experienced its own death. Talk about the seventh house, the
I
setting
mean,
sun, a death.
it was always this very private, taboo,
Hmm.
like, and it's always been something that has been, I think, a gray area in terms of what you can talk about legally. That
Mm.
aspect of it too.
Yeah.
I also think typically um, it's interesting too because I feel like powerful people are connected or interested as well, and I think that also plays into the Pluto factor too. Talk about like working with Hades. I think sex magic. That's a good way to work with Pluto. If you know,
Yes.
I think that's there.
I'm thinking about
Um,
Fox, who's also a Cancer rising, and I just read her book Down the Drain. By the way, amazing book.
Megan
And
Fox, you said?
no, not Megan Fox, Julia Fox.
Julia Fox. Who is that?
So Julia Fox
oh,
is, you described Julia Fox. She's the one of a kind. She's an actress. She was in the movie Uncut Gems, and
Oh,
she
yeah, yeah,
dated,
yeah. Okay, yeah.
yeah. She has a book called Down the Drain, which listened to the audio book. It is like you have to hear it in her voice. It's amazing, and she's rising, talking a lot about she was a dominatrix for many years in New York, and she was in these relationships where there was a lot of power inequality. She was like looking for a sugar daddy, and then she found the sugar daddy, but like everything loses its shine after a while, and soon the sugar daddy wanted someone else, and how that felt, and just all the dynamics of learning how to date while also balancing drug addiction, which is another Pluto theme and getting sober and losing friends to fentanyl and other horrible drugs, you know, like there's a lot of Pluto in her book, a lot of it, hence the name Down the Drain.
I'm assuming that you pulled her chart after reading the book.
Oh yeah, she's an Aquarius, Taurus, Moon, Cancer rising.
Mm. Does it feel oddly familiar, Viv? Just kidding.
Yes, I love it. Hold on, sorry, there's some fire engines against, I guess that's perfect for Pluto.
I couldn't hear them at all.
I couldn't
Okay.
either. You know, I just want to
Actually,
quickly mention a tool real quick because I
yeah.
didn't think to even mention this, but Aubrey and Rose Ives created the Pluto Oracle deck. I think that deserves a little shout. I was just looking in my drawer and I was like, oh, it's not accessible, so I'm not going to hold it up. But I do recommend the Pluto Oracle deck. Yes, right there. P, thank you. Save the day.
Yara and I did the Pluto through the second house talk, and we pulled a Pluto card at the end. So we're going to be doing that at the end.
Oh, that's interesting because I just also want to say Aubrey has one of the the person who wrote, you know, Aubrey has Pluto in the second house. So it's funny that you pulled that during a Pluto in the second house talk.
Oh yeah, and also I have Pluto in the second house. So there we go. Maybe I'll pull a card right. This is a great you're right, Anthony. This is a great deck to do some shadow work. So this is a general reading, obviously, and if you're watching this at home, this might be different for everyone, but I'm going to let everyone be a part of this card pulling. I'm just going to shuffle these in my hand, and then Anthony, you tell me when to stop, and Vivian, you tell me top or bottom.
Okay.
Ooh, yeah, Vivian, you tell me, top or bottom.
Let me know when you feel ready, guys. What is the message for my viewers at home? What can we help them with on this journey?
All right, you can stop.
All right.
Okay.
Bottom.
I'm gonna say bottom.
Okay. Ooh, the
That feels like the
swallow.
shadow card.
I love that card. I've pulled
Swallow.
it a couple times. I really like that card a lot.
All right, I'm looking through the book. What do you have? Do you have a memory of what this card means before I pull up the actual?
No, go ahead. I just got 2 new decks, and so they haven't been in heavy rotation, but you're reminding me that with Venus square Pluto today, that it is appropriate to pull that deck back out.
All right, so it says hope, optimism, last steps on a journey, and trust. The swallow has deep ties to sailors and naval companies across the world. In the UK, a sailor earns a swallow tattoo for every 5,000 nautical miles that they travel. Lore among sailors is that seeing a swallow is a sure sign that you're approaching land. Even if you can't see it yet, it represents the end of the journey back home. The swallow card in this deck represents a similar sentiment, one of hope, one of optimism and trust, a sure sign that you are nearing the completion of a cycle in some way. The last steps on this journey are in front of you, even if you can't see them or you're having trouble believing that they're there. Muster whatever strength and resiliency you can and trust that you nearly made it. This may require some faith in something higher or bigger than yourself, something divine, something omnipotent that seems like a grand plan. Trust that you are fully supported in this journey and what will be carried where you need to go when you need to go there. Whatever the end of this cycle represents for you, know that hope is present. Find a way to grab onto it and trust that after being out at sea for so long, your landing on solid ground is imminent. When was the last time you experienced the undeniable synchronicity of it all? An alignment of so many serendipitous events that it couldn't be anything other than fate. Try to grab onto that feeling now and know that some magic is afoot. I love that.
I think the reason
Me
I love
too.
it so much is because, I don't know, I think we've all been going through a lot collectively, even if we haven't been going through a lot individually for the past 4 or 5 years. And I think whenever you're doing deep shadow work, it feels like, oh, I have what I need to keep on keeping on, when you get a card that really represents trust. Because I think we always lose. I mean, I should just say, I always lose the faith that things will be okay. And I think
Yes.
that card is really helpful in knowing that the hard work does have something that it grants us at the end. That's the thing about Pluto. You know, I hate to say that Pluto, it feels like I don't like toxic positivity when it comes to any kind of astrological work or spiritual work.
Mhm.
I think we go through a lot of challenges as human beings, but I think Pluto does really hand us jewels at the end of such a long journey.
Mhm. I agree. And I think one of the things when Bea was reading that, I was thinking of the Pandora, right? Pandora's box, chaos is unleashed into the world, all those hardships, all the Plutonian things. And at the bottom, there was hope. And I also agree with the it not being toxically positive. But I do think one thing that Pluto teaches us as we receive those jewels is resilience.
Yeah.
And that resilience sometimes isn't always in grit, it can be in softness too. So, and maybe that in and of itself is a jewel, right? Like death is only a door, um, the phoenix into ashes, all of that, right? Every time, I think you mentioned this too, Viv, every time there's an ending, there's always a new beginning. So, yeah, I love that.
Just like that song by Semisonic, Closing Time.
Yeah.
I had to reference The Office a little bit, or it wouldn't be me. Well, I guess, are there any sort of final nuggets of advice or spell work or themes that you would like to talk about before we wrap up? Anyone? Anyone? If not,
So,
where can we find you? Where can we follow your work? What do you have to promote right now?
so I want to give a final thought. I'll let Viv
Sure.
promote first because Viv deserves to promote first. But my final thought on the Pluto in the seventh experience is expect the unexpected. Don't try to control things. Pay attention to the relationships, but specifically the roles that you play in the relationships that you have with other people. And understand that truth is pulled from the shadow. So when you're willing to confront the things that you're the most afraid of, fear doesn't have control over you, it doesn't have power over you if you name and claim the fear. So
I
that's my
love that.
last closing statement.
I feel like Pluto in the seventh house can bring quarrelsome people who are trying to push their power up against you. So I wanted to share Psalm 47 for those of you who like small magic. I know that that's not for everyone, but if you do enjoy a psalm, this is one to recite to settle quarrels. Oh, clap your hands, all ye people, shout unto God with the voice of triumph. I love that. A friend of mine's going through a Pluto battle right now, and the word that we keep meditating on is triumph. So I love that. Oh, clap your hands, all ye people, shout unto God the voice of triumph. For the Lord is high, for the Lord most high is terrible. He is a great king over the earth. He shall subdue people under us and the nations under our feet. He shall choose our inheritance for us, our excellency of Jacob, whom he loved, Selah. God is gone up with a shout, the Lord with the sound of a trumpet. Sing praises to God, sing praises unto the King, sing praises. For God is the King of the earth. Sing ye praises with understanding. God reigneth the heaven, God sitteth the throne of his holiness. The princes of the people are gathered together, even the people of God, of Abraham, for the shields of the earth belong to God. He is greatly exalted. So this psalm can be recited while lighting a white candle and focusing on tranquility. I love this book. This is a great book, by the way. Power of Psalms. 375 ways to use Psalms for love, power, revenge, success, blessings, prosperity, and protection.
I mean, I love anything that comes in the form of a poem, and I feel like the Psalms are very poetic.
Yeah.
So
100%. I grew up Jewish, so I gravitated first towards Kabbalah and things of my background, not to appropriate other backgrounds. I don't necessarily, I call myself an eclectic witch, I guess. I kind of pull from what resonates for me.
It's very Aquarian. It's very
Yeah.
Aquarian.
But
I feel
I think
that.
not for you, that's totally okay. Psalms are not for everyone.
I think if I have a closing thought, Pluto can be a reminder that everything, as certain as we are of certain things, is temporary. And I also think that when we're looking at a Pluto transit, we have to understand that they are all so long and very, very process oriented. So when we think we are losing something, I guarantee what we think we are losing is not what we are going to realize that we let go of at the end. It is this really slow, process oriented thing.
Yeah, I love that. Well, where can we find your work, guys? What are you promoting right now? Go plug yourselves.
Anthony?
Oh, okay. You can find me on Instagram, AP_astrology. My book is out for pre-order. I think anywhere you can order books. It's Astro Style, the intersection of fashion and astrology. Takes you on this journey of generational outer into inner personal planets and how it can define your style. And ultimately, it's about you finding your own style. Tarot is also included, rituals, etc. And mood boards. I think those are the major things I have going on. I don't think I have. And then Astro School, right? I'm teaching the Astro Style workshop. I think it's in June. Is it in June?
I think we decided on June. I'm pretty excited that is one of the highlights of the summer. I'm calling it Astro School Summer Camp. And each month we're going to get a brand new lesson. We're going to have an astrocartography lesson with Ellie of Saturn Seed Astrology. We have some really amazing, mind-blowing lectures that are going to make you think differently about the world around you. I'm super excited for everything. So thank you for being here, Anthony.
Thank you.
I can be found primarily on Instagram at the moment, but I'm hoping, depending on the sale of this property, that the summer will launch me into perhaps what my next platform is. But I primarily do counseling work that can be booked directly on my website, which is linked on Instagram. And I'm also recording a Talk episode with Art of the Zodiac on May 8th about May's astrology. So I'm excited about that, but I think that's probably the easiest way to find me. My website is stars-in-alignment.com, and my IG handle is also Stars in Alignment.
Awesome. One thing I was thinking about just as we were closing out is if you're grieving an old version of yourself, if you're grieving a person in your life while you're going through this transit, whatever it is that you're grieving, another workshop that you can find on Astro School we did a while back is called Burial Rites. And we did this with a grief practitioner. And it was an amazing, experience where it teaches you basically how to create a funeral for an old version of yourself, which I think is just a beautiful guys. So you might want to visit. I'm going to maybe link that down below too, if you guys would like to visit with that. but that's an offering that I have on Astro School as well.
Amazing.
Thank you guys for being here.
Thank you, Mel.
So pleasure to see both
Thank
of
you.
you. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you.